Okay, we're live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Governance and Audit Committee of the calendar year 2024. I'm wishing everyone a happy new year, albeit a little bit late. I'll move on to the agenda and record any apologies. The only apologies I'm aware of are Councillor Chris Walsh is unavailable because he has a conflicting priority. And Councillor Ange has advised that she needs to pop out for half an hour, but will return to the meeting. Are there any other apologies that we should note, please? If not, we'll move on to item 2. Are there any disclosures of interest in connection with the items on the agenda for this meeting? Thank you. I'll take silence as none. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes and the action log of our meeting from the 24th of November 2022. I will turn the pages and seek points of correction, clarification, and matters arising where matters arising are not on the action log or already on the agenda. And if colleagues would feel free to raise their hand if there is anything in the agenda in the minutes that they would wish to seek clarification or correction to. So I'm going to use the big page numbers of the pack. So page 5, which is the first page of the minutes. Page 6. Jane, just on page 6, I wondered when we might schedule debt policy. When would it be best to schedule debt policy on the committee's agenda?
Yeah, I think it's as soon as we can get it on the programme and squeeze it into one of the agendas, we can cover it. That's no problem.
Fine, thank you very much. Turning the pages, page 7. 8. 9. 10. Oh, Jane, on page 10, turning into page 11, the broad item, could you just give us a reminder of where we are with plans for member training? Oh, sorry, Councillor Pete, I didn't see your hand there.
No, apologies, Chair. So I was a bit late. I just noticed on page 9, I think it's the 3rd point down, there's just a spelling of guilt.
Oh. Okay.
And I think that's the same in some other places as well. So I guess it's just failed the spell check or something that's gone through. Right,
yeah. Okay. Well, when I'll sort that one out. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pete. These things are important. Jane, can you just give us a status report on where we are with proposed fraud training for members?
Yeah, we've developed a training package. A few officers have been asked to do the training, undertake it, have a look at it and feedback as to what they think about the training. So we've been asked to do that by the end of next week, and then we will have that training package. Any tweaks or anything made to it will be ready then to roll that out across the organisation, officers, members, everybody. So yeah, a lot of progress being made. We're nearly there in terms of that package being available.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jane. Moving on through page 11. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So if there are no further points, is the committee content for me to approve these minutes subject to a run through a spell checker, as Councillor Pete suggests?
Move.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gareth. Seconder? Everybody might be on mute.
I'll second. Second, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Right, okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. If we could just turn to the action log. I've got a few comments on the action log, which I'll share with colleagues. Mine are really just sort of administrative comments. I've asked the team to invert the log so that the most recent meeting comes first, and we've also asked the team to try to reduce any duplication, but hopefully duplication will be reduced anyway when actions are discharged promptly and on time. There are a number of the items on the action log on the agenda for today and have been completed, and I've also asked for some of the kind of admin of the log just to be tightened up a wee bit so that the status of everything is clearer. But I'll open it up to colleagues for any particular questions on the action log. Okay, there seem not to be any particular questions, in which case I'll work with the Secretariat to continue to improve what actually is an extremely helpful log. So I'll move us on to the statement of accounts, agenda item 4. And welcome to the meeting colleagues from Audit Wales to support our consideration of the statement of accounts. So to commence this item, I'm going to ask Dan to make some introductory remarks, and then I'll ask Audit Wales colleagues to come in after Dan has given us some introductory remarks. Dan.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Today we're bringing you the audited statement of accounts 21-22 for your approval. As you're aware, the draft accounts were signed on the 30th of June 2022 by the Section 151 officer. We've undergone a couple of seminars, one going through those draft accounts, and then later on in November we had another seminar going through expected changes we would be making before these audited version came out. So as far as the timescale goes, we were expecting to complete these accounts by the 30th of November for publication. We know there's been a national issue around the treatment of infrastructure assets. That issue sort of has arisen due to significant historical information deficits, where many authorities are unable to provide sufficient evidence of value of replaced components of infrastructure assets when they are derecognised. This is particularly the case in relation to roads, and some of these issues date back to the 1990s when these assets were first brought on to local government balance sheets. So furthermore, the reporting requirements have not been consistent over time. And since 2010-11, the code has required all replacement costs to be capitalised and replaced components to be derecognised. As a result, the Welsh Government and SIPFA have issued remedies recently at the end of the calendar year to offer temporary solutions through to March 2025. So local authorities are now not required to report gross book value and accumulated depreciation for their infrastructure assets. So in effect, this is the net book value would be recorded as it is in the balance sheet, but within the property, plant and equipment note 12, the gross book value and accumulated depreciation will be removed. The guidance for this solution has only just been received, and future long-term resolutions are being considered by SIPFA and the relevant stakeholders and working groups set up. Where this leads as a long-term solution is still up in the air. We attended a webinar just last week where different methods of valuation may be required going forward, perhaps deemed cost, maybe even depreciated replacement cost method of valuation, replacing the current depreciated historic cost method that is used for infrastructure assets. So it is very much work in progress. So obviously we'll need to keep our ear to the developments that are forthcoming from both SIPFA. So as far as the accounts go, yeah, Wales Audit, or Audit Wales rather, are looking to provide an unqualified opinion based on committee's approval today. We would ask that the committee chair signs a letter of representation alongside the section 151 officer. This letter offers assurance to the auditors we have provided all the information required and requested, and within the letter there are two uncorrected misstatements identified by the auditors. We believe neither of these would alter the reader's view of the accounts. The first one relates to deferred payments of care home clients who have a charge on their property. A running total of this amount is 1.3 million, and we feel at this stage it's prudent not to put that into the accounts. We feel there's possibly some bad debt that would be included in that amount, and we'd like some time to review whether that bad debt and the quantum of it, what would be appropriate really. The second item relates to uplifts to depreciated replacement cost assets. Obviously, we presented this at the seminar where our depreciated replacement cost assets needed an uplift. We'd flowed the adjustments through the asset registers and the ledger, and then it was identified at a late stage that the Brecon High School adjustment had not been done. Basically, this had been overlooked, as when it had been valued originally, there was a different asset number to what it currently has now. So this change, if we'd have made it, would have been 1.2 million, and I say due to the late identification of it and the reason that it wouldn't change the reader's view of the accounts, we thought it we didn't make the adjustment of that 1.2 million. So those are the two misstatements. I don't know if anyone wants to make any comment on those now, or whether to leave it to the end.
If there are any urgent questions or burning questions now, Dan has said he's happy to take them. If there aren't, what I would propose to do is to ask Audit Wales colleagues to come in now, and then we'll move to questions following Dan's introduction and Audit Wales's comments.
Yeah, sorry, there is more to. I just thought.
All right, okay, sorry, Dan.
As those are the adjusted misstatements, I just thought it might be a.
So sorry, you want to say more before Audit Wales colleagues come in?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
if I could just
carry on.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, so Appendix 3 within the auditor's report lists the other misstatements which have been adjusted. So I just thought I'd briefly go through each of those just to provide some context. The first one was a £39 million adjustment where assets have been fully depreciated and need to be cleared from the asset register. These assets have been lying on the asset register for a long time, so the gross book value and the accumulated depreciation is included. The net book cost hasn't changed, so it's a similar accounting entry really to the infrastructure assets, where we're removing the gross book value and the accumulated depreciation, and the balance sheet largely stays the same. We've mentioned the infrastructure assets, which was the second item within that Appendix 3. £16 million then, another adjustment relating to council dwellings and depreciated replacement cost. This was identified prior to draft, actually, where we needed to uplift our assets, valued depreciated replacement costs and council dwellings to reflect additional costs as a result of inflation. This was a nationwide adjustment many councils, depended on whether the councils had value in all their assets in 1 year or not, but many had to make this change, and it was decided that we would do that after the draft accounts had been done. I think that has been explained in the seminar. Another adjustment made was 15.6 million. The Global Centre for Rail Excellence, we received a £33 million repayable funding amount, of which we were expecting to pay 15.6 million back to Welsh Government within the first 3 years of this year. As it turned out, Welsh Government, it was paid to them in October. So what we'd elected to do with our policy, as we were expecting to pay it out within the first 3 months, we moved it to cash and cash equivalents, as that did not perspire. I'm not sure if perspire is the right word there actually, but as that did not come about, we've just decided to move it to short-term investments as per our accounting policies. The next adjustment was 16 million relating to long-term obligations on the shore contract. That had been extended, which we weren't aware of at year end, and something we probably should have been aware of. So we've adjusted that note to make the monetary value of that contract to be included. Contingent liability note, there was a £10 million adjustment on that note. We included the original creditor figure. For clarity, we also have adjusted to include the balance at the year end. There's a £7 million adjustment on the maturity analysis of financial liabilities, where these were understated. And this is, I think, an issue we've brought up in seminars before, where the working paper was updated, but not the accounts. So we've made that adjustment to bring that in line. And also the final one, which was a £13 million cash in transit, which was wrongly categorised within the note. The balance sheet entry remains the same, but there's a categorisation entry which reflects the time lag between the ledger and the bank. So all those adjustments were made, and it's worth remembering, I suppose, that the usable reserve balances within after the adjustments remained the same within the draft and the final audited copy. The audit report in Appendix 4 lists 3 recommendations from audit, and we've accepted these in full. But just briefly going through them. One is the residential care home charges, and I've mentioned we will look further into whether there should be a bad debt set against these charges and whether we need to include these in the accounts next year. Enhancing expenditure on council dwellings. These have been picked up during the audit. The CIPFA code states capital expenditure can only be treated as enhancing where it increases economic benefits or extends a useful life or service potential. We review expenditure to ensure it is correctly accounted for, and I think we need to just make sure we're continuing to do that in future years. Evaluation cycle now, we're currently on a 5-year cycle. We're going out for contracts shortly, renewing contracts where we're looking at 3-year cycles. So hopefully bringing that time period shorter should enhance or lessen the risk of material misstatements in future years. Finally, the last recommendations was around related party disclosures, where we had difficulties which were experienced during the audit as a result of information being removed or not retained for former non-re-elected or for former councillors who were not re-elected in May 2022. That's an issue with the software provider, and we'll pick that up, no doubt, the next time we get into this situation or the next re-elections. But also another point raised was around a lack of sufficient evidence being gathered for interests of close family members' interests, and they weren't as explicit as they should have been within the accounts. We did find a workaround during the process, but I think we need to be more explicit next year in writing out properly to members to get a better hold of the close family member interests. So before passing on then to audit colleagues, I just like to ask members to consider now to approve the accounts and the chair, so that the chair and 151 officer can sign them and the letter of representation. But first, I think we'll hear from our audit colleagues around their auditor's report.
Thanks very much, Dan. Thank you very much. Who's coming in for Audit Wales?
Hi, Chair.
Hi, Steve.
I'll be stepping in here. Okay, so I'll commence. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Good to meet you. We haven't previously met. Just to explain, so I will be an unfamiliar face to you all. I am an audit manager with Audit Wales, and I've been covering the Powers Council audit whilst my colleague Phil Pugh, who is here today in an observational capacity, has been recuperating after an operation. So I've been in a sense covering the period from September through to now. So I suppose the main stage of the audit in many ways. So I'll be taking you through the content of the report. I'll try to avoid repetition because Dan has provided a very good overview, I think, to much of the content within the report and drawn out many of the key issues I would have commented on. So I'll do my best to to avoid that. But just to summarise, really, the whole purpose of this report, which Dan said, this report is to inform your decision today as to whether you as a committee wish to approve the accounts. So you've heard from officers and now you're going to hear from the external auditors. So I'll take you through the main content of the report, but before I do it, just in terms of the high level message, Dan is quite correct. We have completed our audit work and subject to your approval today, it's our intention to issue an unqualified audit opinion, and the Auditor General is scheduled to provide that opinion next Wednesday, which prior to the 31st of January deadline. So I'll take you through the main body of the report, but as I said, I tried to avoid too much duplication, but bear with me if there is an element of duplication, please. I'll take you through each paragraph in turn, sort of sequentially, really. The key elements of that report anyway. Paragraph 6 refers to the fact we have completed the audit, and it also comments on the elongated audit period we've experienced this year, unfortunately. And as Dan rightly pointed out, that's due to this national technical issue in regard to infrastructure assets. There's not much else more to say on that. I think Dan has provided a very good overview on that, and that's something I can see you're well briefed upon. But yeah, that took a long time to resolve, but we're here now, aren't we? So that's good. Paragraph 8 of the report then communicates some key changes to the audit team that have been unexpected really during the year. First one is obviously this, which I've already touched upon, me stepping in to cover Phil's absence. But the second unexpected change has been at the engagement lead level, whereas Claire James was communicated as the engagement lead in the audit plan. I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, would have met Claire, but Derwin Owen, another audit director within Audit Wales, has stepped in to provide that overview for the closing stages of the audit, because Claire's been reassigned to a different role. Both Derwin and myself, I'm not quite sure about Derwin, but my involvement on the audit is temporary, just to sort of elaborate on that particular point. But the engagement lead for the 22-23 audit would be communicated to you in due course if you haven't already had that communication. Paragraph 9, again, confirms, just to repeat myself really, our intention to provide an unqualified opinion. But the next section of the report then covers some of the significant issues we are obligated to inform you as your external auditors that we've encountered during the audit. You know, in many respects, these are the detailed findings from our audit work. And the first point I need to make you aware of, which you're already aware of course, from Dan's introduction, there are 2 uncorrected misstatements in the accounts. I wouldn't go into the detail of those because they're obviously within the report, and Dan's provided you with a good overview of those. But it's our duty to report them to you, so you're aware of their existence. I will add, they're not material, either individually or in aggregate, so they do not affect our audit opinion. So it's quite common to include uncorrected misstatements of this nature. But as I said, is something we do need to communicate to you formally, which I'm doing and which we've done in the form of the report. The second point to raise then, that there have been a number of audit adjustments. Again, Dan has summarised those quite well, and they're in Appendix 3. I'll comment on those very shortly, but I will not go into a great level of detail given Dan's detailed introduction. Third area, the third of 4 areas that we comment on within this significant issues section of the report is in regard to this national issue we've experienced in regard to infrastructure assets. As Dan and I have just pointed out, this has protracted, if you like, the audit process. It has extended the audit period, but we've recently had a remedy from Welsh Government and SIPFA in terms of how to progress that, and the council have taken advantage of this flexibility and done so within the revised accounts. And finally, this section of the report draws your attention to a number of recommendations that we've raised, which Dan has pointed out. If I just very briefly comment on the appendices, just to add a few more, bit more information, if you like, in regard to what Dan has just pointed out. Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 are just the letter of representation and our audit opinion. So don't really want to dwell on those particularly, but very happy to take any comments at the end. Appendix 3 summarises the audit adjustments. I was going to go through those in a little bit more detail, but given Dan's quite detailed introduction, and to avoid repetition, I would just say none of those adjustments have an impact on the bottom line. They do not affect your usable reserves position, which is quite important to communicate, albeit several of those adjustments are material. They are sizable adjustments, but they are of a disclosure or a classification issue. So the key thing I think you need to know as councillors and officers, of course, is there's no impact on the bottom line. And finally, to conclude, Appendix 4 talks about the 3 recommendations we raised. And just to add, really, I said I wouldn't go through those in any great detail, but we have had a positive response from management to each of those. All 3 of them, we feel there's a commitment to address for the 22-23 audit, and we'll be following that up as part of our 22-23 audit work. So I'll stop there, and I'd be very happy to take any questions or queries you might have on the report.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to open up to questions from the committee, questions to Jane and Dan, or Steve from Audit Wales. If colleagues could raise their hand if they would like to ask questions. I'll bring in, excuse me, Councillor Peat first, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and yeah, thank you, Dan and Steve, for very in-depth, comprehensive presentations there, which being a new councillor, was most helpful to go through there. So thank you both. I think, Steve, you may have probably answered my questions, but just if you wouldn't mind if I could clarify. So some of the adjustments in Appendix 3 and the corrections there sort of appeared to me to be about balance sheet, and it was more about presentation and disclosure rather than having any impact on anything in terms of revenue. The only other one, though, was the uncorrected, that misstatement of 1.3 million, and I think you did hint that it was deemed to be non-material. But I just wondered overall, when we're going to go through a very tough budget setting process, is whether or not that should be corrected or not.
And you're right in what you're saying in terms of the adjustments we've made that have been made to the financial statements as a result of our audit. There's impact to the financial statements, obviously, a material impact. There's no impact to the financial position of the council. So you're quite correct to come to that conclusion. In terms of this uncorrected misstatement, yes, I think if that was recognised in the accounts, it is income due to the council that isn't recognised, so it would have had an impact on the closing position of the council, albeit, as Dan quite rightly pointed out, an element of that 1.3 million would not, well, it's quite reasonable to conclude not all of that income may not be recoverable, and therefore there might be a bad debt provision offsetting part of that income. So I can see Jane has got her hand up, so I'm sure she's got some more additional context to add to this this point.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Jane?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've not included these deferred charges within our accounts previously, and that has really been around, you know, assurance about whether we can recover these. They can be held for many, many years, and I think that's why we felt it was unwise to correct them at this point in time until we have been able to assess them very detailed in terms of what provisional bad debt we may need to include as well. So we could have included both sides of that. Obviously that would not have impacted on the bottom line, it would have been the same, but we felt in terms of where we've got to and the delays we've seen so far, as it's not material, and as I always take a prudent approach when we do our accounts, I felt that this was the most appropriate thing to do. Gives us a bit of time to review it and see whether we need to include those in next year's accounts.
Thanks very much, Jane. I'm just going to ask, before I bring you in, Councillor David, I just want to add a question, a kind of related question to this matter, which is probably an action point going forward. Linked to residential care home charges and the whole regime, I'm quite interested in the authority's policy and approach to deliberate deprivation of assets. And I'd be interested at a later date to understand a bit more about how we, as an authority, mitigate the risk of that approach when it comes to property ownership and people trying to protect it from care home charges in due course. It's probably not for just now, but I would like to understand that going forward. Councillor David.
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't unmute. Just a very brief question for some clarity around the residential care home charges. Perhaps Jane can answer this. Who's the debtor? Is it the care home or is it the individual? Does the care home pay this or the individual?
It's the individual. So it's basically a charge that's applied to the property of the individuals in receipt of that care. And the deferred charge would represent income that we would be able to collect when that property is disposed of in the future. So I think that's why, you know, there's a considerable risk around that and a considerable length of time around that as well. So it's on that basis that we're treating it as carefully as we are.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor David. John, do you want to come in, please?
If I may, Chair, sorry, I'll just. It's a question really for Jane and Steve. These accounts have been compiled remotely. In other words, people have not been sitting in an office doing it. They've been working from home largely. I was concerned in a minor way back in July with the original draft that there seemed to me to be a more than usual error rate in those accounts, which has been corrected. But can we have an assurance, please, that the working from home and working remotely is in fact working properly, and it's not going to be subject the authority to any undue level of error. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, John. Jane, and then I'll ask Steve to come in as well.
Yeah, I think most of the work that we do generally now is all via computers and via systems, so we're not dealing with ledgers and books and things like that that we all need to see. So much of that work is remote, even when you're in the office, I think, is part of that. I think there's been a challenge for us over a number of years now, moving to where we've got to now, and I think we've now settled into that routine much more effectively. We do have access to the office where we can meet and we can go through certain aspects of the accounts at certain times throughout that process. So I think taking on board and just reviewing where we've got to this year and whether that remote working has played a part at all, we can rectify it by making sure that we have those regular meetings as we pull together the statement of accounts in the future. So I don't know if Dan wants to pick up on that, but I think, you know, we are now classed as flexible workers in terms of our finance teams, but we do meet regularly. And there's team meetings and higher level meetings that we do go into County Hall for, or other offices. I think Dan did mention that in terms of the accounts, having a paper copy of these documents when you're going through them is a benefit. For me, that's quite straightforward. I'm in County Hall once a week. I can collect a set and go through them at my leisure then with a pen, marking them up when we're reviewing them. But that's something I think we want to take on board. But I would say it hasn't jeopardized anything in terms of what we've done, and I'll wait for Audit to comment on working remotely themselves through these last few years as well. But I think we can just look to strengthen that wherever we need to by those face-to-face meetings.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. Steve, can you comment from a Wales audit perspective?
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't disagree, rather, with anything I've heard at the moment. I don't think any of these. I haven't got the track record of knowing what audit adjustments have been experienced previously, admittedly, but I don't feel working from home has generated these audit adjustments. I don't think remote working, home working has been a factor whatsoever. It's quite common, you know, we do an audit, we find, from my experience, we've been doing the audit for 6 months broadly because this elongated window, and so we picked up lots of stones, like you could argue as well, during that period. So yeah, it's quite common to find issues, and I don't think it's been the volume of them or the size or the scale of them has got anything to do with home working. Going forward, of course, things might change. You know, we are working on more of a hybrid basis, and so, you know, that's something for Phil to consider for the 22-23 audit. But as an audit team ourselves, we've been working remotely as well. I think that's important to remember, albeit at times we have been getting together as an audit team within our Cardiff office. So we've been working as a team in a sense together, but albeit auditing remotely. So it's, we're all finding our own ways to sort of work through this arrangement, and no doubt it will change and adapt going forward.
Thanks, Steve. Phil, is your hand up for this same point? I'll bring Councillor William in after Phil then, if Phil's on this same point. Phil.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and hello everyone. I just wanted to add as well, big thanks to Steve for covering for me while I've been off the last couple of months, so that's much appreciated. He's been working closely with David and the rest of the audit team. Just to add really around the remote working in response to John's question, Steve's pointed out that currently, as our audit team, we are in the office at least 2 days a week in our Cardiff office, working as a team on there. Obviously, in terms of going forward, we're aware of the council's position, and Jane's alluded to the flexible working contracts of finance staff. And just to point out as well that this is a very similar situation that we're finding across all authorities. The vast number of authorities now have seen since the pandemic, the footprint within the office is not need to be used as it was before. So the remedies in terms of us working closely with the council going forward, previously, obviously, we did have our own office within the pump house in Llandod. We work closely together a couple of days a week in our own office, and then obviously via Teams and that remotely. But should the need arise, we can always sort of come to Llandod to meet with Jane, Dan, and their team. So that's something we can explore again going forward should the need arise. But in terms of John's question around, has remote working led to any of the errors, that's probably more for a council viewpoint on there. I guess the only thing that I would say is obviously this year with the extended timescales because of the deliberations around the infrastructure assets. That's not helpful from both sides, and in future obviously we've been, well, in the past and the future, we'd be looking to get the audits completed much quicker, but because of the national issue, obviously it's dragged on considerably this year.
Thank you very much, Phil. John, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it's giving us all the assurance we can ask for at this particular juncture. Thank you very much, both. All.
Thanks, John, for your question. Councillor William, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all, and particular thanks to Jane, Dan, and the home team for all the efforts and hard work that have gone into to bring the accounts to a point where we're almost ready for Adrian Crumpton to sign them off on our behalf, and I think that's that is not an insignificant task, as is pretty evident. Just a couple of questions from me at this point. Firstly, there was reference, and I've lost the page reference at the moment, to match funding for levelling up projects. Is that money going to be capable of rolling over or reallocation in the light of our unfortunate failure to attract levelling up monies as was announced yesterday, or was this for a previous tranche of levelling up monies that will be called in? And my second point relates to PAC page 110, and it's to do with valuation techniques used to determine fair value and so on. I was just interested in a little bit of clarity as to on what occasions we call upon the dark arts of estate agency and sort of property advice in-house, and on what occasions we either are obligated to or would choose to take on the services of the district valuer to determine the best value. I don't quite understand whether that in those situations, whether that's an option or whether there's some sort of threshold or trigger that requires the involvement of the district valuer prior to a disposal. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor William. Jane or Dan?
Do you want to come in first, Dan or James, on anything, and I'll pick up what you don't?
Shall I discuss valuers? We have a external valuers we appoint. It was a 5-year cycle ending. The last year is 22-23, and we're out to tender for a new valuer going forward. So all of our valuations are carried out externally for these accounts. We do have valuers in-house that are like our clients that help us with things as well. But all of the valuations in the accounts are carried out by external valuers. And we've worked with those to come up with the indices that we've used to uplift in this year's accounts as well. And I can't remember, there was a beginning to your question, Councillor William, and I can't remember what the first part was, sorry.
Thank you, James, for that, and that's reassuring. In fact, that's out to tender now to keep things sort of fresh and regularly assessed. No, my question was the role of the district valuer and the valuations office for Wales, if that's what it's still known as, because that, I guess, is that function is different from an external expert opinion that we appear to be hiring in for a fresh period again, which is again perfectly regular. I just don't understand when we draw on the opinion of our external appointed advisors, and when we are subject to the regime of the district valuer in terms of a disposal.
Okay. The district valuers were our external valuers for a set period of time before we moved to Savills in this current batch, and we are, when we get the results of the tender, we will have a different valuer again. We do go out to DVS for certain disposals, or when we see fit, before a report is drafted and approval is required. But they don't. The DVS valuations are not used within the statement of accounts.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor William. Thanks, James. Jane, do you want to add anything?
No, I think there was a question around the levelling up fund and match funding.
Absolutely.
I mean, anything referred to in these statement of accounts would be relating to projects that are already in train, so those that are already approved via the levelling up, and yes, we would have match funding earmarked as needed to support those projects. They are, though, allocated to specific projects. When you bid and you gain the funding, it is ring fenced to that project. So we wouldn't be able to carry anything forward or utilise it for these projects that we've now failed to have success in terms of the bid. So they would be standalone.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? I've got a few points of questions, but I'll open the floor before I come in. Anything further? Jane or James, I wondered if someone would comment on the note on GCRE, please, given that is quite a novel, not novel in a contentious way, but it's quite a novel arrangement that we have there. I wondered if someone could comment on that, please.
Yeah, I can give you a brief update. I mean, we are mainly in the same circumstances that we found ourselves in for a number of years now, where we continue to hold this funding that we were given through Welsh Government, and it is yet to be invested into the company itself, and we're not in a position ourselves yet to even assess whether that onward loan would be forthcoming at the moment. The recovery of some of that funding by Welsh Government, they have then had to invest that in the company, but in terms of the due diligence that we would need, as I said, we weren't in a position to be able to make that decision at that point. So at the moment we still hold this remaining 17-point-something million, and James will correct me, I get it mixed up in terms of what we gave back and what we hold, but it's 17.4, I think it is that right, James? Yes. So we continue to hold that at the moment, and it will not be invested further until we are able to make that assessment and be comfortable that it is likely to be repaid at a point in the future.
Thanks very much, Jane. Thank you. There was a point in the narrative report, it's at the start of the narrative, quite early on in the narrative report, where it's about supplier prompt payment to suppliers, and our figure for the financial year 2022-23, no, 21-22 was 86%, and I just wondered what it was historically and if there are any issues around the authority meeting the prompt payment, Welsh Government prompt payment targets. Jane, you're on mute.
Did you have some more specific data on that, Dan?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself by clicking the screen with me on it, but yeah, all I had was the previous year really. We were 91% in 2021, and obviously this year 86%. So I need to really speak to officers involved more closely with it to get some more information, which I can provide to you, if that's okay, Chair.
Thanks. If we could take an action on that, because prompt payments is really important, not just because it's a compliance issue, but it's a compliance issue because it's important to, especially in current times, with ensuring that local suppliers are provided with what we owe them promptly, so that, you know, we don't want cash flow issues in our local supplier community or anything. But so it's important because, you know, really for the whole local economy. And the other question I had, Jane, was I think this was also in the narrative. It was around the cost reductions for the year in question, and 30% were not achieved. And I just wondered if the executive team had thought about any learning from that experience that's perhaps been taken into the budget planning round for this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think we have consistently undelivered as an authority on that achievement of savings in all of the financial years. Most recently, at least, we've maintained it around the 70 to 80%. It needs to be higher. In terms of how we've developed this year's budget, clearly we look to seek assurance, we challenge heads of service when these proposals are put forward. We work closely with Cabinet, the portfolio holders and heads of service to get that level of assurance needed. With any delivery of cost reductions, there is always a level of risk. And of course, we assess that level of risk in terms of the robustness of the budget plan. And a couple of years ago, we did set aside a risk budget to offset that risk of non-delivery or for any other events that may crop up and hit us during the year. And you'll see in the budget proposal that's actually been proposed now, because of the continued uncertainty that we're seeing from an economic point of view, we have increased that level of revenue budget that we hold to offset that risk. So it is that balance of being prepared to cover the risk, but trying to push heads of service to get much more assurance and make sure that the savings being proposed are robust and are deliverable.
Thanks, Jane. I absolutely appreciate the balancing act of mitigating risk. That the only question I might pose to that is, does the creation of the revenue offset fund to mitigate risk of non-delivery, does it act as a behavioural disincentive, without being too pejorative, to not bother?
I mean, we wouldn't, if we were to release that fund, it needs to go through a lengthy process for a head of service to actually put a business case, explain the position and so on before we would release that funding. So there would be many hurdles as to jump through. We don't remind people that it exists and is in place over that period. I think as we've developed this budget, there were a number of cost reduction proposals that were proposed early on, but through that challenge period, we found that actually they're not deliverable in the timescale set out. So they've been amended, reprofiled, or even removed from the budget plan before it's been proposed by Cabinet. So we are trying to strengthen that and make sure we've got a lot more assurance around delivery.
Thanks, Jane. I mean, we can take some assurance from that scrutiny process at senior executive level and from the control framework around access to the revenue offset fund. Phil, did you want to come in the same point?
Yes, please, Chair. I was just going to add, really, just for a bit of context, especially for probably a lot of the newer members. In previous years, we've completed some work around financial resilience at the authority. And one of the areas that we've looked at particularly is in relation to the achievement of the cost savings, which you've referred to and Jane's mentioned. As Jane outlined, probably over the last sort of 3-4 years, particularly, the level of savings that have been achieved around about the 70%, probably in most of the years, which, although not being 100% of the target, which would obviously is what the council's aiming to achieve, is not a bad figure overall. The point you're making, Chair, in terms of around sort of learning from perhaps why some of those projects may have not delivered, we have commented on in our reports previously around that learning from, you know, for example, if something was projected to save £1 million and it meant changing the service at a point in time, or changing roles or whatever, were they too ambitious in the timescales to get things changed? And being realistic about what you can achieve in a financial year as opposed to 12 months being achieved. Would it be 8 months and things like that? So they have been commented on in our reports previously, and we've had assurances from Jane and colleagues that the challenge sessions, when the cost improvement plans are being looked at, are considering things like that and learning from what went wrong on some of those projects that didn't deliver the year before, particularly if they're in specific service areas where they're likely to do the similar thing next year. So our financial resilience reports have commented on that aspect previously. So just a bit of context really for newer members.
Much appreciated, Phil. Thank you very much for that contextual commentary. Councillor David.
Yeah, just to say that I agree with everything that's been said, but I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that since 2013 we've made £109 million worth of savings. That's a significant amount, to say the least, and we've had to make another £16 million this year. So the actual access to savings within service is reducing all the time, and they become more difficult to identify. So we've actually got to look more at service redesign and income generation, etc., as opposed to simply cutting elements of the service itself. And that's what we are doing. But take some assurance as well from the fact that all these projected cost savings are going to be fully scrutinised before the budget will be presented to full council on the 23rd of February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor David. Points very well made. It's an extremely tough environment for the public service at the moment in financial and operational delivery space. Jane, I've just got a couple of questions, or not specific questions, but can I invite you to comment on a couple of the areas of movement within the accounts between years? If you could just comment on the HRA movements and on the short-term debtors movements, if you could, or if you want to delegate that to Dan.
Yeah, I'll ask Dan to come in. I think in terms of the HRA, the position will vary year on year. It's a ring-fenced account, so where expenditure isn't incurred or where projects don't necessarily go ahead as quickly as we expect, you would see variation between the years there. So it's not something we'd highlight as a major concern. I don't know, Dan, have you got any more to add on that one?
I think, yeah, in terms of the valuations this year, obviously they've impacted HRA as well. So there's quite big movements regarding those valuations within the HRA. As far as the debtors go, we know there was Welsh Government, an increase in, I think it was 23 million increase in Welsh Government debtors, and most of that money has been received now from Welsh Government. So there's cost of living grant. There was additional revenue support grant at year end, which all related to last year, as well as various other different grants that came in. Hardship, I think, was 3.5 million. Social Care Recovery Fund, yeah, the £735 bonus payments. There was 3.7 million received in May this year. So altogether, yeah, the increase was quite large. Compared with what we received last year, but yeah, it's all been accounted for now. All been received this year.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for Jane, Dan, James or Steve on the statement of accounts for 21-22? If not, I'll bring colleagues back to paragraph 1.9 of Jane's covering paper, which Dan referred to earlier, where the committee, the recommendation for the committee is that we consider and approve the 2021-22 statement of accounts, which can then be formally signed by myself as chair and Jane as section 151 officer, and that the statement of accounts be published as soon as possible, and certainly by the 31st of January 2023, following the Auditor General's approval. Are colleagues content? Could I please have a show of hands for that? Okay, I think that's approved. Thanks very much. We have a real hand from Councillor Gareth. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. And thank you very much to Jane and her team and colleagues from Audit Wales. This has been a particularly demanding financial accounting and audit period, and I certainly don't underestimate that, and I know that colleagues don't either. So thank you very, very much. It's been a tough one, and hopefully next year won't be quite so tough, but you never know. But
we're nearly there already.
Yeah, exactly. You're in the thick of it already.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
So thank you very much, everyone. We've lost a wee bit of time there, but I think it is actually quite important that the committee has a thorough discussion on the statutory accounts. I'll move us on to agenda item 5, which is the Strategic Risk Register, which Bets is going to lead on. Bets, would you like to say anything by way of introductory remarks, please?
Yes, please, Chair. So as it says in the covering report, the Governance and Audit Roles Committee is to seek assurance on the effectiveness of the arrangements in place by the Council to manage risk. The report you have in front of you sets out the Council's latest position on managing its key risks contained in the Strategic Risk Register. And please see attached appendices, which has got a detailed risk register report and heat map. I'll go through the covering report in a minute. Audits and Governance Committee are asked to review the report and the arrangements in place to ensure that there is appropriate understanding and management of risk, and that these and the actions in place to mitigate the risks are monitored and regularly reviewed. So if I go into the actual report itself now, this is the report for the Strategic Risk Register for covering Q2, 22-23. The background to it is our Strategic Risk Register is key to safeguarding the organisation and building resistance into our services. We're still at a time when the Council is facing unprecedented challenges, and so therefore a risk managed approach to decision making will help us achieve the wellbeing objectives and stronger, fairer, greener. So further to the risk session, a dedicated risk session held by SLT in July, a dedicated SLT risk session was held on health and safety, recruitment and retention, including demography, that was held. As a result of that, it was decided not to have an overall health and safety risk on the Strategic Risk Register, as it's currently well managed at service level and does not warrant strategic overview. However, as part of our risk management framework, any service-specific health and safety risk that has a residual score of 15 or above will be flagged up for consideration to be escalated to SLT for consideration. The health and safety risks in relation to building assets was also discussed, and this features later in the report. The existing strategic recruitment and retention risk was discussed and in detail, and strategic mitigation reviewed. Also, the following climate risk was created, and also a risk on nature. This was approved for escalation by executive management team and is in this report as a proposal to be escalated by Cabinet. So we have the new risk of EDR 0011, impact of climate on our ability to deliver services, with a residual score of 16. I'm not going to go through the potential consequences for the mitigation because I'm sure you can all see them yourselves in the report. We also have the following nature emergency risk that was also created at the same time, which is HTR 0018, impact of nature emergency on our ability to deliver services, with a residual score of 16. Again, I'm not going to go through the potential consequences for current mitigation because you can all, hopefully you've all had a chance to read them, and if you haven't, they're in the report. Then we move on to the review of progress to mitigate the current risks. So as at the end of Q2, there are currently 13 risks on the strategic risk register. In Appendix C, you'll see full details of those 13 risks, including the mitigation identified to control them, and importantly, the progress reviews against the management of the risk. In Appendix C, we have got a heat map which visually presents the results of the Q2. And if you, we can see from looking at that heat map immediately that 6 out of the 13 risks have a probability of likely and an impact of major. We would also, we are also asking Cabinet to formally escalate 2 more risks, which are come from education and PPP. That is LEA-INF 001, insufficient level of funding, revenue maintenance and major improvement capital. Insufficient level of revenue maintenance and major improvement capital funding is likely to result in unsafe and unfit assets within school property, and this is a residual score of 16. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to read the potential consequences and current mitigation, but hopefully you've had a chance to read them in your packs. The other risk we'd like to escalate is SEM 0003. School building stock deteriorates due to insufficient level of revenue and major improvement capital funding required to maintain them so that they are safe and fit for purpose, with a residual score of 16. A paper was recently taken to SLT regarding possible power outage, and consideration is currently being given to create a power outage related risk. I can confirm, because we're currently doing Q3, that consideration was being given and we have created one, and that further information will come through in the Q2 Strategic Risk Register report. Also, the same is it's the same comment in relation to a risk, the fraud risk. So also currently under the development is a risk regarding the council's susceptibility to fraud and the consequences and controls needed. Finally, as per our risk management framework, any risk that is scored 15 or above must be considered for escalation by SLT. All the following risks that are listed, and I'm not planning to go through them all, but if you do want me to, please say, but it's recommended that none of these risks are proposed for escalation, as they have been successfully managed on their own service risk registers. We also have a draft risk appetite that's been written and scheduled for Cabinet approval. That was due to come to you today, but due to a very full agenda, it is now coming to you in the next meeting in February. And finally, I said that before, but following on from school modernisation, piloting the issues module on JCAD, SLT have agreed to start recording issues on JCAD. That's our risk management specialist piece of software. The actions to manage an issue are operational, therefore this is only a formal process of recording the issues for governance, and it is not intended to duplicate the current process of managing an issue. So therefore, if I take you right through to the end to section 9, the recommendation, it is recommended that Cabinet notes the current strategic risk register and is satisfied with the progress against mitigating actions for Q2, and approves the escalation of LEA-INF 001 and SEM 003, which are detailed under points 3.10 and 3.11 respectively, to the strategic risk register. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Bets. That's a very helpful introduction. From a personal perspective, before I open it up for questions, I felt that the risk register was actually shaping up to be a really, really effective document, and I could see that a sort of process of continuous improvement in how it was structured and its impact. So thank you very much for that. It seems like it's a really effective document. Obviously, it's what happens to it that's important, but the process that you've described around escalation of additional risks and decision making around items for the strategic register sounds like a robust process. I'm going to bring in Councillor Gareth and then Councillor Graham and then Councillor William.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, really good document and a really good sound base. Just a question around, obviously, with a lot of documents like this, if they are, sometimes you can see them out of date before they land in the committee here, because obviously it moves so fast. So I'm just wondering, where are we around external risks? I noticed we've got the Ukraine war in there, but obviously we've got strikes coming up that's obviously going to be hitting the county and the rest of the country, and the impacts around schools and also around ambulance and social care. I'm just wondering how that feeds in, because obviously it's a very movable feast.
Good question, Councillor Gareth. Bets, can you take that, or would you like to pass it to one of your other colleagues?
I can take it unless Jane would prefer to take it. Sorry, I can't see any hands, so if you could please advise me, Chair.
You answer it, Bets, please,
okay.
if you can.
Currently, I'm not aware of any risks in relation to the strategic risk register in relation to strikes, Councillor Gareth. However, that does not mean that there isn't a risk on one of the individual service risk registers, because, as you know, services review and evaluate their risks on a regular basis, a minimum of a quarterly basis in their management team meetings. I try to go around them all in a logical process, but there are quite a few to get round. So just because I'm not aware of any doesn't mean that any exist. And the process would be that the services would be looking and managing those risks themselves, their regular meetings with their portfolio holder to advise them. And if at any point we think that that risk needs to be escalated onto the strategic risk register, we will, for proposal. And added to that, just for reassurance, as mentioned in the report, any risk that does score 15 or above is automatically added to SLT for proposal to be considered to be elevated to the strategic risk register. I don't know whether I've missed anything, Jane, and whether you want to come in on anything.
Only just to add, you know, in terms of some of those things, they're live, they're happening. Rather than a risk, they're actually here. So we're dealing with them at an operational level. We have an SLT touch base, as we call it, every Thursday morning. So all of those issues that are live and happening immediately are discussed, and any action is taken there that we need to consider. And we're also involved in discussions at a national level around these as well. So although you don't see them featuring in the risk register, they're very well being looked at and acted upon at an operational level.
Thank you both. Councillor Gareth, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's just one of those, obviously ensuring, and I'm confident from what the officers report, I was fairly confident before, but it's just one of those, just reassurance that as these things do escalate, something that's not on a risk register today, by midday tomorrow could be, and it's how we make sure that those gaps aren't missed to ensure that, you know, the public are protected and the councillors. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks, Councillor Gareth. Councillor Graham, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to raise the issue around the risk of social care provider failure, and express really some concerns about whether the level of risk at 20 is really high enough, because I'm sure we're all aware the closures of many care homes across the country, and indeed across Wales, North Wales in particular at the moment. In fact, you know, I was speaking to a care home owner recently who passed on his thoughts that due to the rising costs that they are facing, you know, there's a bigger crisis there than perhaps we're recognizing here, and the fact that many of them are going to need a lot more to even exist. So I'm just wondering, I'm looking for some assurances whether the officers think that this risk level at 20 is really high enough, or should it be higher?
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Graham. Before officers come in, when you might have to help me out here, but Councillor Graham, you may remember that we identified the financial resilience of residential care homes as one of the first deep dives that the committee wants to undertake, and I think we're doing that on the 9th of February. But,
that's right, Chair.
yes, so absolutely, thank you very much for raising it, Councillor Graham, because it is an issue, a risk of critical importance. I would like to bring in officers today for some level of assurance, but also to remind the committee that we will be receiving a deep dive, and we'll have the opportunity to have a much deeper discussion about this particular issue on the 9th of February. But Jane,
Yeah.
can you come in on that, please, just for just now, please, because it is really critical.
Yeah, and I think, you know, valid points in terms of what we're all seeing in terms of the economic challenge out there. It's impacting on all businesses. So yeah, the service will be looking at it in more detail. They have regular conversations with our providers. You know, providers do come forward when they have significant issues, and we look at those and try to help manage them. And we consistently do that anyway. So you recall, of course, as well, through the COVID situation, there was support there for those as well through that period. So the service will monitor this on a continual basis. We have those discussions at a senior leadership team, and I think probably best placed now for the service to be able to tell you in more detail what they are doing specifically around that. But I think we have as much assurance as we can have at this point in time that those conversations are taking place.
Councillor Graham, is that okay for just now, with assurance that we'll be having that deeper discussion on the 9th of February?
Absolutely. I look forward to that discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. Councillor William.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm very much on the same topic and the same page as Councillor Graham, really. And my query was also in relation to page one, pack page 198, and it relates to whether or not there was a particular risk that I'm aware of in a couple of situations, which could well be replicated across the county, where the care business is kind of sustainable and resilient, but where it's subject to relatively short-term tenure in its premises, and where premises are placed on the commercial market. The potential that a perfectly viable business then ceases to be able to continue to operate, and whether or not that is worthy of analysis as a separate risk, or whether it's just wrapped into the wider issues of viability. This does relate to particular examples and issues that I've brought to the attention of Councillor Sian Cox, who heads up and is portfolio holder for adult social care, and it may be that Rachel is aware of it also. But given the proximity of the 9th of February and the the fact is relatively unlikely that things will develop in the interim, perhaps that's a sub discussion that we can build into the deep dive. But I just thought it was a slightly separate but related risk to the one identified already and escalated.
Thanks very much, Councillor William. Jane, I'll ask you to comment, but could you and Wynne take Councillor William's points back to the team who will be coming to lead on our deep dive discussion, so that Councillor William's points are addressed in the presentation and the discussion that we conduct on the 9th of February.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could probably add anything at this stage, but yes, we'll make sure that we do that.
Yeah, but I think it's important that they're covered,
Yeah.
given the imminent discussion.
Thank you both.
Councillor William, is that okay?
Yep.
For just now, thank you. Gareth, I'll bring you in now.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, 2 points really. The first one is regarding something I've raised in the past, which is this distinction between risks and issues. And Jane, in her commentary, mentioned that a number of these matters are being actively addressed now. To me, that puts them in the class of issues. So I'd really like to get some sort of distinction between the two things. And the second point, it's a fact of life that a lot of risks that actually materialize were never anticipated. I think it's 1 in 4 number 10 policy unit researchers. So I'm wondering, and one of these, the classic, is COVID, which was never really anticipated or planned for, but the council's response and amongst its partners was superb. So where are the lessons learned from the COVID experience on reflection that set a sort of template or model which could be applied to identified potential risks and things that just happen? And is there a process that the council has got in place as this to be part and parcel of their management of risks?
Okay.
Thanks very much, Gareth.
I mean, in terms of that, we have our business continuity plans. So the business continuity planning across the whole organisation at a service level looks to identify as many of those risks that we can in terms of being able to deliver our services. And I think most of our business continuity plans include things, and these are probably live issues at the moment, aren't they, around power outages. We've got those included. We did have things around pandemics. They probably weren't as detailed as were needed when it came to what we've just been through. But I think having those plans in place gives us some level of coverage and gives us that area to look at and look to address in terms of timescales and how severe those things are. But we've also got then those emergency response and the whole system around when something comes to the fore and we have to deal with it. We have structures in place which we pulled into being quite quickly with COVID. The reporting structures, the governance structures around that, the decision-making structures, all of that exists. And we just adapt it to whatever crisis it is that impacts us on us at that time. And I think we've worked in that way for a number of years with floods, with snow, with all of those things. And I think COVID and what we had in place in readiness for that was just a bigger issue that we dealt with in exactly the same way as we always have. So I'm fairly comfortable that we do have all of those emergency planning sort of perspectives and systems in place to deal with, I won't say anything that comes our way, but the majority of things that come our way.
Thanks, Gareth. Does that deal with your points for just now?
That gives a lot of context. But when you see the register in isolation, that context isn't part of it. Because the register is just a statement, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined, Jane, to agree with. I think where Gareth's thinking is, if I'm wrong in your thinking, because Jane, what I think I heard you describe was a set of mitigating governance and mitigating readiness. So is there a risk that is a high level business continuity crisis, future pandemic risk, and what you described are the mitigations and the things that we have in hand to escalate an immediate response?
Yeah, I think they probably are. I think if you let us take it away, let's think and reflect on the question and think about what we might need to include or not, as the case may be. But I think, yeah, it's a valid point. So we'll take it away and have a look at it.
Yeah, and I'll seek more questions, and I've got a couple of points on a couple of the specific risks myself. But picking up Gareth's point about issues and risks being distinct, because issues are things that we're dealing with in the here and now. I think for the minute, when we refer back to paragraph 1.3 of the covering paper for this item, which as Bet's pointed out to us, this committee is being asked to review the report and the arrangements in place to ensure that there is an appropriate understanding and management of risk, and that these and the actions in place to mitigate the risks are monitored and reviewed regularly. My assessment of this discussion is that we have discharged that review, and we're having a thorough discussion which provides a level of assurance that risks are being managed effectively within the authority. But I think for the minute, I would like to record Gareth's point about the distinction between risks and issues, and ask for that to be given further consideration, as well as Gareth's other point about the major events risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If that could be recorded in the minute, but just a couple of specifics from me, unless, Councillor David, I'll bring you in before my own points.
Thank you, Chair. I was just reflecting on some of the discussion we were just having, and we did have a briefing just a couple of weeks ago, actually, for all members from our emergency planning officer, and there's some assurance there that as far as events that could potentially be catastrophic for the authorities, such as a future pandemic, severe flooding, power outages, things like this are concerned, the emergency planning officers, they are holding contingency plans for that. Whereas opposed to the risk register, when that happens, that then we've got to manage the impact on services. And in many ways, the risk register is about services and the impact of potential events or issues on that particular service and how we handle them, that what does become a risk to delivery of that service. But it's just a thought that's Gareth was saying there, and so looking at some of the conversation, discussion, that I know we've opened up some member development sessions, particularly around finance, to lay members. I think perhaps we need to be a bit more selective, and when we get a member development session around issues like emergency planning, it could be potential in the future for members of Audit Committee to attend that as well.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very welcome suggestion, Councillor David. I'm sure Gareth and John would both welcome that, and I think we can also take some assurance from the information that you've shared with us. Thank you. Thanks very much. Any more specific questions or general comments before I move on to a couple of points I have myself? Okay, so just a couple of points from me. I was looking at the GDPR risk and the cybersecurity risk, two separate risks. The GDPR risk, BETS, has an inherent score of 12 and then a residual score of 12. And when I was reading the papers, I was really just querying the nature of the mitigations and the interventions that the authority is discharging. Made me wonder why the inherent and the residual were both still scoring 12, and if that was reasonable.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that question, and good question, because it is something we have challenged ourselves. It's been challenged quite frequently, and recently challenged again by the CEO. In fact, the CEO challenged any risk that was of a similar nature, just for assurance that are the mitigations in place working? If they are in place and the score isn't coming down, is there something do we need to look at it, etc. But in relation to the GDPR risk in particular, when challenged, the service felt very strongly that The mitigation was in place, and it needed to be in place because of what the controls were doing. However, it wasn't actually, there is a reality that it won't bring the risk down completely from the inherent score to the residual score, because no matter what, in the circumstances of GDPR, there is always chance for human error, and we will get a fine, the information commissioner contacting us with a breach, and that therefore that inherent score warranted that situation. And it was when we looked at, well, whether does it warrant having these mitigations still in place, these controls? It was a case of, yes, we still need to be doing them, to be managing the risk, to be doing our statutory duty, and also it's the commissioner would also not take kindly if we weren't putting that mitigation in place.
Thanks very much, and I'll bring you in, Emma. I can see your hands up, but in terms of our role as seeking assurance and scrutinising process, I actually take some comfort from your answer and the fact that the Chief Executive and the senior team have been putting back challenge to the local team's assessments. Emma?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We do challenge this regularly, all reviews actually, at least quarterly, and services will do so more so. And I think the 151 officer touched on this. Actually, I think in terms of our risk management, it's got far better, certainly from dealing with such risks in the pandemic. But this particular one on GDPR, the reason it's 12 is because a breach of GDPR can occur in so many ways. So failure to provide a privacy notice, failure to have in place correct agreements, failure to respond to access requests and other data protection rights within timescale. There's obviously personal data breaches occurring due to failures in ensuring appropriate and technical security, so things like cyber and operational policies and measures, and obviously then the staff to follow them. Yeah. In this area, there could be a maximum fine of 17 million, 4% turnover, but other action can be taken, such as public reprimand and enforcement order. And additionally, failures to consider the individual's right to privacy and protection of their personal data can result in compensation claims, and also lack of public confidence and reputational damage. So even with all of the things that we put in place, one member of staff causing a data breach where we didn't have a written process or we weren't trained can result in action being taken against us and public tenure. So we use the controls to be able to mitigate the risk as best we can, so the council can demonstrate that it's done everything it can do to prevent a breach of legislation, and so make the argument to the Information Commissioner office that the issue was caused by human error rather than organisational failings.
Yeah.
So, and the fines aren't just for breaches of personal data, they are for non-compliance with data protection legislation. So although we've got all of those mitigations in place, it just takes one person to do something and that we haven't got direct control of at a corporate level, and actually we can then see a breach. So that's the rationale behind that.
Thanks very much. It gives me some confidence that the scoring has been tested and thought through. Emma, would you be able to comment on the cyber security one? It felt to me possibly a wee bit low, but again, I think what I'm seeking is assurance that it's been thoroughly tested.
Yeah, absolutely. Tested regularly. It's one that we're fully aware of. But actually, if I align this with the budget, the budget that Cabinet approved this week, that obviously is going to go through due scrutiny and then subsequently to Council, it does actually increase, provide an additional role in cyber security space, because we feel actually to make sure that we can mitigate the risk and enhance our security, we need that additional capacity in the team. So I'm comfortable where it stands now, although you know, it is challenging. Hacks happen daily, as we're aware of, and you know, we've even had an external provider who hosts the system on our behalf hacked in the previous quarter. But actually, we've been very good, and our systems stood up to the challenge there, and our reporting, which instigated immediately. And I think at one point I was getting hourly updates, certainly daily then, and so on and so forth. So I'm comfortable where it is at the moment, but it is one that we continue to monitor very closely.
Thanks, Emma, and I'm pleased to hear that even in a very, very constrained budgetary situation, that resources are being allocated to ensure that the council has the skills and capability to mitigate some of these significant risks, especially in the ever-changing space of digitally enabled services and the need for cybersecurity. So thank you very much for that assurance. Phil, if I could bring you in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to mention again, probably for background, some members may be already aware of it. Audit Wales did a follow-up report on our cybersecurity work that we did about 18 months ago, and that report was shared with chief executives. We decided to take the decision. Well, we took the decision on the advice of specialists, really, that the report wouldn't be published in our usual way because it could encourage hackers to try and do so on public bodies. But that report, should the committee be of interest to the committee, potentially it might be one for a future session, where I could arrange for the project manager to come and do a quick presentation to the committee on it. And the only other thing I was going to say by way of background as well, is probably just in terms of where there are public documents making reference to cybersecurity, such as the risk register, which is online, maybe just to have a think about the level of detail that's in there in terms of developments and things like that, what you're doing. So and probably just be mindful of that when it's in a public meeting, what is said around the nature of it, because it's ever more threat for all bodies.
Thank you for that, Phil. Yes, a development session on such things would be very helpful in the future, and we will note and take your advice on what is put in the public domain. And can you hold that thought around the development session for agenda item 10 as well, please? My very final comment on the risk was around the workforce risk and the mitigating action to increase direct payments. And I just wondered about the labour market for personal assistance in Powys, and if there was a risk that we were simply transferring our risk to clients by increasing direct payments, and wondered if any of the officers could comment on that. Emma.
I'll come in there, Chair, not really on behalf of social services, but more so my corporate remit of recruitment and retention.
Thank you.
Some awareness of that area. There is an element of transferable risk, but actually our direct payments seem to have been very successful in Powys when compared with the rest of Wales. We seem to have quite significant numbers. We also have an agency or an organisation in place that supports individuals who opt for direct payments, and they help with that sort of management capacity and the payroll and etc. and support, and making sure that things like sickness leave etc. are covered. There's clearly an open door for us as well, that if we needed to, in terms of business continuity, to assist an individual, that we can step in. But I think the main thing with the direct payments is that I think the what's the word? I think people are interested in them because of the greater flexibility that it gives them, and to meet their own personal need, rather than having to fit in with an organisational structure and timing and schedule, because you tend to have that one-on-one support that is around that individual element. And I know that Powys have also been very successful in the community catalyst elements of smaller carers coming together, sort of 2 or 3 coming together in some form of arrangement to support individuals. But as I said, I think in terms of business continuity, one, the benefit for the individual is the greater flexibility to meet their identified need, but then the backup, then we're there if we need to, although that said, there are challenges, as we know currently, in terms of meeting the demands in the health and care sector.
Thanks very much, Emma. Again, the role of this committee is to seek assurance that the service is considering all of these risks and matters thoroughly. And I think it's really helpful that the senior officers are able to answer questions with such authority, because it does give us a level of assurance that these things are scrutinised and managed effectively within the authority. If there are no further questions on the risk register, I'm going to move us on to item 6, with apologies that we are running a bit behind, but I think we should be able to make up a bit of time over the next few items. No further questions. I'll move us on to agenda item 6, which is the annual governance statement process for 2022-23 and onwards. And thank you very much for this paper, and colleagues will recall that this paper has process and paper has been provided at our request following some of the uncertainties about sequencing of clearance and decision making earlier, not earlier in the year, late last year. I'm going to bring in Catherine and Shane for this item, but thank you very much for the paper.
Okay, so the report is page 221 of the agenda pack, and it describes several changes proposed to strengthen and formalise the process that we have underpinning the drafting and authorisation of the authority's annual governance statement. So the revised process is presented here for the attention and agreement of the committee. And as you're aware, and it says in section 2.1, the authority is required to produce an annual governance statement, or often AGS, each year alongside its statement of accounts in fulfilment of its obligations under the Accounts and Audit Wales Regulations 2014. So it provides an account of the processes, systems and records that we have in place to demonstrate the effectiveness of our governance arrangements during the financial year. And the AGS is structured around the 7 principles of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, or SIPFA, and Society of Local Authority Chief Executives, or SOLIS. The ownership of the AGS, point 2.3, sits with finance. However, authorship of the document sits with the Transformation and Democratic Service, namely the Strategic Planning, Policy and Performance team. And so they developed the 2021-22 report at the same time as compiling our annual corporate self-assessment. So historically, there has not been a formal process in place to gather evidence efficiently. However, last year, evidence was collected via the self-assessment process that was put in place. So in section 3, page 222 to 223, it's advised that the method for obtaining the information from services should be formally aligned with the corporate self-assessment process to ensure that we maximise value. The overall ownership of the AGS remains with finance, but the authorship with the Transformation and Democratic Service, and that final approval is continued to be provided by the Governance and Audit Committee. And more importantly, the timeline on page 222 of the pack should be adopted to provide clarity. So the timeline is there for you to peruse. And you'll note that a few of the dates in this timeline do have an asterisk by them, and the team need to follow up with other stakeholders to finalise these and really narrow down the dates for those few. So point 3.5 also highlights the 8 responsible officers that would be assigned to specific areas to enable assurance. You've got the monitoring officer, head of workforce and OD, section 151 officer, and health and safety manager, procurement, and then the head of economy and digital in terms of information governance and complaints, and then the director of corporate services in terms of our policy, strategy and resources, and as well as the director of social services and housing in terms of safeguarding. So point 3.6 outlines a rubric, essentially an evaluation scoring guide, which could be used to assess the levels of assurance that we could adopt. And the evidence provided by the AGS would support each of the SIPFA principles and be assessed against these characteristics. So it's important to note that this isn't a prescriptive model, instead it will provide a focus for discussion. And it's important to note that the colours shown in the key on that page there, 3.8 on page 224, do not represent a RAG rating system. And finally, on 3.10, it is proposed that the committee approve the above amendments to the current process.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
You finished, or?
Yeah, so we've just run through that, but basically, if there are any questions, we are here to answer them.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any questions or comments on what Catherine has said, the paper and the proposed process? I think you've done such a thorough job that there are no questions or comments. I mean, I personally think it's really, really helpful. So thank you. I'm going to ask for a show of hands, because the paper does formally ask us to agree this process. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gareth. Oh, or is you just showing hands for approval? Yeah.
Yeah, just showing hands for approval.
Okay. I think Catherine and Shane, you have agreement to this, so thank you very, very much for such a thorough paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to note that it will be on its way now with your approval to Cabinet EMT and then Cabinet very shortly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Chair,
moving on to
Chair,
oh, sorry, John, would your hand up for a question?
No, it was a comment really. Under legal implications, we haven't got confirmation that the report has been approved by the monitoring officer.
Oh,
I know, apologies. We have, it's just when we put this into the agenda pack, that comment wasn't there.
Okay, that's
sorry,
fine.
but they have fed back and they've said that there's nothing to add.
Thanks, John. Thank you. That's a good T to cross. Thank you very much. Everyone is content with the process. Thank you very much for the paper and for the work that went into its preparation. Jane, moving on to item 7, and I believe Karen is going to lead us on the insurance paper.
Good afternoon, Chair. Apologies that the paper was a little late, but I hope everybody's had opportunity to see that. I'm aware that the history has been a number of concerns raised about the indemnity to members for the roles that they fulfil on other bodies on behalf of the council. So I'm hoping to deal with this once and for all. Members will have seen that an inquiry has gone out to them through email, asking them to gather some information from the bodies that they sit on. Obviously, we'd welcome replies as soon as possible. Do accept that it's onerous because members have to ask these organisations and get a response. So we realise there will be some time to gather in all the information. I have had a couple of replies, so that's encouraging. And then when we have all the information, we can properly understand the scale of the problem and come up with a solution. But as the report says, it is not possible for the council to put a directors and officers policy in place to cover members for the boards that they sit on. We have explored that. It's unfortunately not possible, but we'll try and find a solution as best we can to allay any concerns that there are.
Thank you very much, Karen. Has anyone got any questions or comments? And I've noted that this isn't quite the end of the story, and that it needs to be a bit of a next phase. So it'd be helpful to know when you anticipate the next phase being completed. But before we come on to that, do any colleagues? John, you've got a question. John, and then Councillor William.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Yeah, I've been sort of agitating on this one. I think I quite agree with it. It's really probably quite impractical for the council to insure against every conceivable activity that the members get involved with, particularly these very, very small charities. I haven't seen the letter, and perhaps if somebody could send me a copy, I'd be very grateful, or send us lay members a copy, so that we can see, because I think the most important thing is that the members themselves recognise the risks that they may be bearing. That's my main point, really. They probably need to look after themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Point well made. Councillor William, and then after Councillor William, I'll bring in Gareth.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to John for the appropriate level of caution in this matter. Just to say that that I've been in contact with and copied Win into 2 inquiries of fairly substantial organisations. One being the Brecon Beacons National Park Monitoring Officer, Mr. Mark Ronan, and also Mr. Rob Edgecombe, who I think is broadly the equivalent of Clive Pinney in Carmarthenshire, and who looks after the police and crime panel. So those are 2 bodies that are aware of the inquiry and have both referred it to their relevant advisors. I just wanted to ask Karen what timescale would be helpful in this matter, so that if the matter isn't responded to in a reasonably swiftly, when we should be chasing up. I know there's a whole host of different and smaller organizations and other partner organizations, but it's obviously, it's important that we bring it to a conclusion, as Karen implied in her opening remarks. I just would appreciate a sort of an indicative timeline, please.
Okay, I think it's reasonable for the organisations you've asked to allow them a couple of weeks to reply. If it was turned around and there was an inquiry made of us about a particular insurance position, then we would be able to reply in that time frame. So I think that's reasonable. You've mentioned 2 large organisations there, and the fact that there are smaller charities. Now they're going to be less available. They're going to be meeting less often. Yep. They might take more time. So it's almost a sort of common sense approach, because the small organisations might not be available, but large organisations and these commercial bodies that we have concern around should be able to turn those questions around quite quickly, and I would just allow them a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's a helpful guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor William, for your question. Gareth?
Yeah, 2 things, Chair. Firstly, the agenda item talks about officers being members of third-party organisations, but the paper refers to members specifically.
Yes.
So the point about officers, I think it would be the policy of the council to encourage people who work for the council to go on local charities and community organisations, but do they hold a register to determine that those people are doing it in an individual capacity and not as officers of the council? Because it could follow that they could be perceived as representing the council and be party to some sort of litigation. That leads me on to my second point, which is about a sad fact of life with litigation, is that they go after the organisations and the individuals with the deepest pockets. And the council could be risk of being sued, because it's a more substantial organisation with assets and money compared to a charity. So what comfort does the council get that the insurance cover of these third-party organisations covers that eventuality? Because sure as eggs is eggs, they can get joined in any sort of proceedings with the organisation in question, both as a body corporate and sometimes as individuals.
Thank you, Gareth. Jane, do you want to take that, or yeah?
I'll come in. I don't know if Karen might want to add anything, but I mean, we have the register of interest, don't we, where everybody that's got an outside interest that could impact on the council, then that needs to be declared. I'm not aware we would therefore have a register where individuals who happen to work for the council would need to record each of their sort of activities, but accepting your point that if it's seen as if there's an assumption that it's on behalf of the council, that may not be the case. So I think it's something I probably need to discuss further with Clive Pinney. But I would assume that only where officers are appointed to those bodies on behalf of the council are they then formalised. You know, myself as a director operating with Haups while it was trading, you know, that was clearly something that was as part of my role, but there may be other things. I don't have any involvement with anything else that I would need to necessarily declare, but yeah, it's a point worth making. So I will check that through with the monitoring officer and get some further advice from him on that. I don't know, Karen, was there anything that you wanted to add at all?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, I'll just say really, I take the point about claimants going after a defendant with the deepest pockets, but that defendant has got to have a liability or potential liability. So if we're talking about an organisation and perhaps it is this small charity, that's why it's the individuals are sitting on their board, as I'll call it, that are at risk because they're directing that organisation, and that's why it is them that needs to have the insurance to properly protect their directors, not just obviously the members that are sitting on from a local authority, but all of the other people that fulfil that role. It isn't the charity that would be the subject of the claim, it is the individuals. That is why this is so important. And we come back to really as you can't serve two masters, and this is where this comes from. That whilst the council can have insurance that indemnifies, as has been mentioned, made of officers for their roles, that's when they're fulfilling the role that they're in for the purposes of the council. When they're acting on another body, they're acting in the interests of that body. This is why we've got to understand where the risks are and what is going on out there.
Mm-hmm. Is that answering your questions for just now, Gareth?
It's I just talking about these organisations having the right having cover. Is it the right level of cover?
Yeah, I think it's really exposing the complexity of this space, isn't it? The risk and complexity. More work to be done anyway before this is really closed. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a little bit of a Pandora's box moment, especially around there. I'll use myself as an example. I'm not just gone grey, really young, but I've been on the council many years, 15 years coming up. When I first said we used to have the Shire Committee, and we were appointed onto local groups through the Shire Committee, which I'm still members of through the council, but I've no ratification, anything else like that. So the Gwyn's Almshouse is a prime example in Hay. Local charity looks after 4 houses. I'm sat as a trustee appointed through the county council. They all know when I finish, I'll be replaced, and whoever's replaced me goes on there. But there's no record or signing up to that really that actually can fall back on the council. It's just something that's always happened. Yeah. And with the Shire committees going, it does cause problems. I've also been appointed onto the Legion building as a trustee. We have got our own indemnity insurance. We've done that ourselves a while ago because there was some conflict, and I looked into it. So we did get our own indemnity insurance, which we're happy with. But the thing is, I think when we move forward, we do need to engage with PAVO to ensure that the information of this is going out to the third sector charity and organisations, especially as new ones are set up. And obviously some of the old ones are operating. And I think they're a vehicle that's going to need to be involved, because I can see some very big grey areas coming forward, especially with the committees I've been pulled onto as my capacity as county councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gareth. If we could make a note of that and take some action points from Councillor Gareth's comments. Gareth Hall, did you want to come back in? No, I don't think he did. Right, okay, I'm going to make the assumption.
No, I'm fine, Chair, thanks.
Right, okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Karen, for your paper, and thanks to Jane and Karen for their work on this. It is a bit of a Pandora's box, but I think it is something that we need to get right, because it could significantly adversely affect individuals, and there are conflicts of interest issues around as well. So we're getting there, but it's not quite a closed issue for the committee yet. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll move us on. Colleagues will note that we did have an agenda item 8, which was the Corporate Complaints Annual Report. That paper has been withdrawn and is to be reworked, and I am advised that it is likely to come to the committee meeting in May. So we will move on to agenda item 9, which is the committee's self-assessment action plan update. I think by way of introduction from me, I was pleasantly surprised when I read this paper, although there are still some items from the self-assessment, which I do appreciate was undertaken before most of us were on this committee. But it felt to me as though we were making inroads into a fair number of the recommendations. Whilst there is still work to do, it felt to me like a fairly good platform from which to continue to work and from which to have our next annual self-assessment in March. With that introduction, I'll ask Wynne if he wants to add anything, but invite any particular comments or observations from colleagues at this stage.
Nothing particular to add, to be honest, Chair. Just take comments from members.
Okay, thank you very much, Wynne. Colleagues, are there any particular comments or questions at this stage on the developing action plan? Okay, well, we'll leave it at that for now. As I said in my opening remarks, we are rapidly approaching the point where we will be conducting our next annual assessment, and I'd like that to be a face-to-face meeting held in County Hall. I think it's, I think it's high time that we actually did some face-to-face meetings, and I know that the council is moving towards a place where they'd like committees to meet. I think it's at least twice a year face-to-face. So I'd like to think that we could meet face-to-face in March and have our self-assessment session face-to-face. So as an action point from item 9, if colleagues could begin to reflect on their first few months as committee members and areas that we might want to examine when we go through our next self-assessment. But if there's nothing more for the moment, we will move on, and we've almost caught up a little bit of time. Happy to move on? Yep. The next item, again, I'll just say a few words and bring in Wynne if he wants to. Item 10, Governance and Audit Committee member skills audit. And thank you very much, colleagues, for spending the time going through the questionnaire. And as you'll recall, the conduct of the skills audit is linked to what we've just been talking about, our self-assessment action plan and the establishment of the 4 working groups, which we have agreed, so that we can ensure that the working groups comprise members with the requisite skills, capabilities and knowledge, and so that we can examine where there may be development opportunities that we need to attend to going forward. So from my perspective, and I think the information rather leaps off the page, and I'm just shuffling through my notes, that the areas for attention in the audit, the skills audit, where the areas that I think we should focus on for development were audit, risk and crisis management, and technology. And interestingly, through the discussion today, partly prompted by Phil's comment on what Audit Wales could supply to us on cybersecurity, but also drawing out Gareth Hall's comments in respect of the risk register about risk and crisis management. It is really interesting that those themes of technology resilience, GDPR, cybersecurity, risk and crisis management have all come up in our discussions today, but they are two of the areas that we've identified through our skills audit as probably as development needs. I think our skills audit on the whole is extremely strong, but those three areas are the areas where we probably need to think about a bit of training and development for ourselves. But if there are any further comments on the skills audit to date. Okay, well, it remains really for me to thank Wynne again for taking us through that process. I think it's been extremely helpful, and I'll talk to Wynne and colleagues about how we can enhance our skill set in audit, risk and crisis management and technology, as well as keeping all of our other skills fresh. Moving us on to item 11, which is the work programme. From my perspective, and again, when I'll bring you in, I think our work programme and our forward agendas are pretty meaty and pretty demanding. Wynne has already forewarned me that the 9th of February meeting is looking quite a tight, long meeting. So he and I will be having a meeting to look at that. But one of the things I really wanted to encourage members to think about is what should our programme of deep dives, we've got the resilience of social care residential providers in February. We've also got one other item already identified for a risk deep dive. When
yes, Chair, it's the oh sorry,
it's
if I have was in the right place. WCCIS.
Yeah, which is another really important one. I wondered if workforce planning was something that we might also have a deep dive on, but really open to members as to where you would like to go with the risk deep dives. Emma?
Just to confirm that in terms of workforce planning, we have had a recent audit report on Spring Forward from Audit Wales. So I'm just thinking about your time, more than welcome to the deep dive, but just conscious that Audit Wales have recently done so.
Emma, and we had that paper in November, the Audit Wales report, and it was actually really good news. Yeah, thank you. So probably not a priority one immediately. Yeah, thank you.
We've actually got it, Chair, down for work which year we're in, November 24, because what I've done is I've gone through each of the risks and tried to sort of double up on a committee. So you've got a series of 2 deep dives per committee for the next couple of years, really.
Right.
But we can adjust that accordingly when we discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, if significant things come through, the opportunity is always there for us to change. Okay. Any comments or questions about the work programme? Okay. I think we have pretty closely, oh, actually we have made up time towards the back end of the agenda. Are there any final comments or questions? If not, I will move to close the formal meeting. John? John, I think you might be on mute.
My apologies, I was on mute. We were going to mention, weren't we, the pension contributions?
John, thank you very much. Yeah. John, would you like to open that question. It's an assurance matter, isn't it, for the committee?
Yes, indeed. Within the proposals for the budget for that went to Cabinet this week was a proposal to reduce the contributions to the pension fund by, I think it's 1.7 million this year, and reduced amounts for the next 2 years after that. I totally understand that this has all been through the necessary assurances from the actuaries and from the pension committee. But I was mildly disappointed that we couldn't actually see the actuaries' report. Certainly we won't be seeing it before the budget is put to bed. The reason I'm disappointed in that is that that report comes in a standard format. And one particular useful feature of it is that it contains a sensitivity analysis. In other words, it says what is the impact of a 1% increase in inflation above that assigned in the report? What is the impact of a 0.1% change in the discount rate, and so on and so forth. And I think if that was made available not just to this committee but to members, it would enable both this committee and members to be more totally assured about the validity of the proposal as it stands. As I said, I don't doubt that this has all been through all the machinery, and all the care and so on has already been taken. But I think it's up to us to be individually assured as a committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And although it's about future years as opposed to this year, I think it's an important assurance matter for this committee. So Jane, could you perhaps give us a sense of the assurances that the committee can expect, please?
Yeah, in terms of the actual review itself, it isn't finalised till the 31st of March. 2023, so the final report won't be actually available until that point in time. However, based on the valuation and the data that was looked at from March last year, then applying all of the assumptions and so on that the actuary does in terms of what the pension fund looks like over that period of time, it is looking very positive in terms of the valuation of the pension fund. So based on the contribution rates that each of the employers currently has to make, so the council is an employer, one of many in that fund, those rates are reviewed against that longer term projection of the fund and how it's fared over a period of time. One important thing to note is, of course, this is looking at a very long period of time into the future in terms of that pension fund. So changes in the economic situation as we've seen now in itself doesn't impact as significantly on that fund because it is a much longer term fund. So there are various levers and so on, and diversification of the fund that obviously mitigates changes such as we've seen. So based on the valuation and the updated valuation, and I can assure you that the actuary does take a very prudent approach in terms of those assumptions, in terms of the discount factor and so on that's built into that assessment. It is in a much better funding position to what we've seen previously, and as a result of that, the deficit or the secondary contribution rate can be reduced, and that's what we're seeing, and that's how the council is therefore able to propose that saving within its budget proposal, because we will see a reduction in those contribution rates, and it is mainly around the deficit contribution rate rather than the ongoing primary rate that we see. In doing that work, the actuary takes notice from the Scheme Advisory Board. I was trying to remember the name of the group, and they are seeing this quite nationally as well. So when any reduction in contribution rate is considered, it has to be considered in a prudent way, and to really consider the longer term of the fund and the stability of contribution rates and so on. So all of that is clearly something that would have been factored into the workings that the actuary has done, and they are comfortable that they have clearly complied with the regulations set by the board as well. So we have complete assurance that a prudent approach has been adopted in coming to this conclusion, and everything is in order, and we do have that level of assurance. And I can assure you, from my perspective, having reviewed that, we have absolutely taken that prudent approach.
Thank you very much, Jane. Would it be possible for the committee to see a written note from the actuary on this for the record, please?
Yeah, we have been having discussions. We just haven't managed to finalise it. I think it's due to pressure and workloads at the moment, but we will make sure we get that.
Thank you very much, John. Is that okay for just now?
That's fine for now. I'd look forward to the actuary's note.
Thank you. Gareth?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Just going back to the forward work programme, with our working groups, the 4 groups now starting up, I think we need to factor in updates from each of the groups.
Yeah.
Updates, and also maybe to identify any common themes that are emerging across the groups, and if anything needs to be elevated within the council.
Yeah. So agenda time for updates from each of the 4 working groups, time to examine cross-cutting themes, and items for escalation. What may be helpful, Gareth, then, and we can talk to Wynne about this, is the updates should probably be quite short and focused, but they should probably all cover a common set of themes, so that we can do that cross-matching of themes, whether it's governance, financial, resourcing, whatever. We can give that some thought, and items for escalation to through the political structures or through the officer structures. Thanks, Gareth. That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you very much. If there are no further comments or issues to raise, I will close the formal part of the meeting by thanking everyone for their contributions, and especially the officers for their contributions and for the preparation that goes into making these meetings successful. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll close the formal meeting now, Wynne.
Thank you, Chair.